The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau, but first this week's 1-on-1 in 10 with leader of the Labour Party, Chris Hipkins. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful, Chippy.
Great to talk to you, Bomber, as always. And hey, look, I discovered as I was listening to your introduction that you do have something in common with Winston Peters.
Let's hear it.
You both use us and we as your pronouns.
Chris, I put to you that the government is exhibiting political paralysis in the face of what has been described by the head of the IEA as an energy crisis worse than the 1970s oil shock and Ukrainian war combined, because National's entire election narrative is that we are in this economic position because Labour fecklessly spent on COVID, which is why they are sitting on their hands as Kiwis get beaten to a pulp at the petrol pump. We need solutions, not excuses, don't we?
Well, the problem with the National Party believing its own lies is that they're now trying to turn that into government policy. New Zealanders actually want some certainty about what's going to happen here. Is inflation going to spike back to the levels that it was when they said it was all the government's fault and it was nothing to do with international factors? Because that'll highlight the fact they don't want to admit that, because that'll highlight the fact that they were wrong in the first place. But also, what are they going to actually do in the event that we do start to run short of fuel and there have to be some really difficult choices about who gets access to it? Kiwis need to know that information now so that they can make plans. Those who are essential businesses and essential workers and essential services, they need to know that now. And if they're not, they need to know that now as well so they can make other plans.
I want to circle back to National's election narrative. If it is true that Labour borrowing during a once-in-a-century pandemic is the reason why we are facing economic hardship, why is National borrowing more than Labour did?
Well, this is the thing, they believe their own lies. And the reality here is Nicola Willis is borrowing more money. The government's debt is getting bigger. The deficit is getting bigger. More people have lost their jobs. The cost of living is continuing to get higher. The National Party came into office without a plan. All they have is blame and excuses. Every time they're asked a tough question, their default position is to say, oh, it's all Labour's fault.
No.
It's 2.5 years since the last election, and they still have nothing to show positively on their own side of the ledger.
The last tanker is now out of the refineries, meaning we run dry of diesel on May 22nd. Shouldn't we be actively looking at lowering the speed limit from 100 to 80, working from home mandates for public servants, free public transport, and immediate diesel rationing?
Well, the International Energy Agency issued some guidance weeks ago saying this is what they're expecting countries to do. Most of the things you just mentioned are on that list of things that they're already asking countries to do now. And our government's got their head buried in the sand. They're saying nothing to see here. The reality here is if it all catches up with us, they're not prepared for that. They haven't gone through the exercise of figuring out what are we going to do if fuel starts to run short. Their plan seems to be to hope for the best.
Yes.
Now we can all hope for the best. That's no problem with that. But you've got to plan for the worst, and then of course hope that it doesn't happen.
We are less than 24 hours away from President Trump's bewildering boast to bomb Iranian civilian infrastructure in what would be a clear breach of international law, and many legal academics have already argued would be a war crime. His justification that he would be inoculated from prosecution because the people he is bombing are animals is an extraordinary comment. Why is this government refusing to call America and Israel out over their illegal war in Iran?
The threats to bomb civilian infrastructure like bridges, like power stations, the bombing of a primary school. These are things we shouldn't be needing legal advice to condemn. They are absolutely disgraceful. Donald Trump's tweet over the weekend sent a shiver down my spine. It was absolutely wrong. And any New Zealand politician who refuses to condemn that needs to have their conscience checked.
Isn't hoping Trump can get himself out of the worst geopolitical blunder since invading Vietnam just vacant optimism here? He has clearly miscalculated and only seems capable of doubling down rather than de-escalating.
It's not clear that Donald Trump ever had a clear idea of what he was trying to achieve. He never had a clear understanding of what he was taking on. He never had a clear exit strategy. He never had any kind of mandate to do it. And the New Zealand government still doesn't seem to know what its position on this illegal war is. It is an illegal war. A primary school has been bombed. You know, we should be saying very loudly and very clearly that we are opposed to this war, and we find the actions here are repugnant.
Henry Cook was reporting from the Post this afternoon that the Prime Minister is still unsure about the bombing of that school. I don't. What? What about not bombing primary schools is difficult for the Prime Minister?
Well, it seems the Prime Minister's still waiting for the Americans to justify why they bombed a primary school. You shouldn't need to wait for justification from anybody to say that bombing a primary school is just unacceptable.
Right? Winston Peters is in Washington right now. Is he there to denounce American foreign policy, or is he there to get his Five Eyes marching orders?
Winston Peters should be in the United States right now to condemn the actions that the US and Israel have been taking in Iran, to make it clear that the New Zealand government has no support for the Iranian regime, that we want to see international law returned to. That is how we deal with these issues, not through unilateral actions where there is clearly no mandate, there is clearly no plan, and the upheaval and the turmoil that has been caused as a result is being felt all around the world, and particularly here in small countries like New Zealand.
As the leader of the opposition, you're briefed on military intelligence matters. Are New Zealand SAS troops involved in any Iranian actions, and should New Zealand keep out of this militarily?
Certainly not that I have been briefed on. New Zealand should absolutely keep out of this militarily. Any action that New Zealand takes here should be following a United Nations mandate. We have previously said, even in conflicts where we've disagreed, once the United Nations involved, once there's a United Nations mandate, there can be a role for peacekeeping, for humanitarian support and so on. But it shouldn't be to backstop unilateral action by the United States and Israel.
Isn't there a deeper message here that geopolitics is reshaping the energy market permanently, meaning EV subsidies, solar subsidies, and 100% electrification of the economy from 100% renewables is a national strategic interest? Is Labor ready for that challenge?
We were working on that challenge when we were deposed from government in 2023.
Yes.
We had one of the fastest uptakes of electric vehicles in the world, and the current government, on coming into office, absolutely tanked that. We were moving to 100% renewable energy for our electricity.
Yes.
They tanked that plan and instead wanted to import liquefied gas from other places around the world. What a dumb idea that's proven to be. We had plans in place around solar. We had plans in place around making sure that we were tackling, climate change and moving to sustainable fuel sources. And you know what? We even had a plan in place to build a 70 million litre strategic reserve of diesel so that if there was a sudden supply shock, we'd be ready for that. And guess what? Shane Jones cancelled it.
What do you think of and make of Shane Jones' constant attempt to try and blame Labor for the closing of Marsden Point? We all know that's not true. That's just not true. It wasn't Labor's responsibility.
Because Shane Jones is trying to deflect attention for something that was his responsibility, which is making sure that we were having sufficient supplies, reserve supplies of fuel. And he cancelled the plan to build a 70 million litre strategic reserve of diesel so that in the event there was a supply disruption, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in now. And now he's trying to find someone else to blame. The reality is Marsden Point was a private business.
Yes.
We did get advice on whether there was a case for government intervention. And actually the advice came back and said you could provide more fuel security by building a 70 million litre strategic reserve. So we agreed to do that, and Shane Jones cancelled it.
What do you think New Zealand should be doing with its voice on the global stage right now when we are seeing the kind of out of control aggression from America and Israel? We were really clear on denouncing Putin when he made an illegal act of war. Why aren't we doing that with our allies? Surely with our allies, we should be using our voice more.
New Zealand's never going to be the biggest, most powerful country in the world, but we can be a very powerful voice on the world stage by being principled, by being independent, by standing up for the things that matter to New Zealanders, like the fact that there should be rules, that everybody should play by those rules, that you shouldn't take unilateral action without a mandate, that you shouldn't bomb a primary school, that you shouldn't be disrupting every other country's trade for no particular reason whatsoever other than the fact that you felt like it. These are things that New Zealand should be clearly speaking out about internationally. And guess what? Our standing with the rest of the world would actually go up if we did that.
Right. Finally, Chris, last week we had enormous reaction to recreational fishing spokesperson Matt Watson discussing the deeply flawed fisheries bill that bends over backwards for commercial interests in a way that looks like naked corruption, banning public access to camera footage, expanding bottom trawling and fining anyone $50,000 for publishing camera footage that shows commercial fishing interests breaking the law. Many Kiwis are sick of a government legislating for their donors at the expense of the environment. What will Labour do differently on fishing to get the balance right between commercial interests and the rights of the recreational fishing community, many of whom are fishing just to catch kai for the whānau?
It's a really good example of where New Zealand First's actual priorities lie. They lie with the fishing industry, not with recreational fishers. They lie with big corporates rather than with sustainable environmental considerations.
Yeah.
Labor will return the focus back onto making sure that we're actually being sustainable in the way we run our fisheries and our other environmental resources. We've got to make sure that we're not running down fish stocks, that we're not bottom trawling and destroying the environment in the process, that we're not placing things like, digging up the ocean floor for minerals ahead of good environmental protection. All of these are the things that New Zealand First are promoting, and you can draw your own conclusions about what their motivation for that is.
Thank you, comrade. All power to your arm, Chippy. We'll see you again next month.